Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Take Your Campaign from Good to Great, Building an Agile Marketing Department. We will be getting started in a few minutes, but first, I wanted to go over some housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a video of the recording will be emailed to you. If at any time you have questions, please type them into the chat box. If you have additional questions after the webinar, please feel free to email Rex. His contact information is on the screen. Now I would like to introduce Rex Briggs, CEO of Marketing Evolution, and co-host Tim Petrella, Vice President of Client Success at Marketing Evolution. As many of you know, Rex has been working with Fortune 500 companies to improve marketing ROI for more than 2 decades. He is a leading expert in unlocking ROI profits through measurement and is credited with pioneering many digital measurement techniques, including post-click analysis, attribution modeling, and cross-media measurement. Tim Petrella serves as Vice President of Client Success at Marketing Evolution. Tim has worked in a broad range of industries, including consumer packaged goods, retail, healthcare, and financial services, helping senior marketers leverage ROI data, software, and insights to improve bottom-line success. Tim builds on a deep understanding of clients' data and analytic techniques, as well as an organization structure and change management to ensure Marketing Evolution clients are wildly successful. Prior to joining Marketing Evolution, Tim served as an associate at the Boston Consulting Group. Tim graduated with honors from Princeton University. So Rex, I'm going to hand it over to you now to get started.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm going to just say a few words and then introduce Tim, who's going to lead us through today's discussion. I'm really excited about today's discussion because it really captures a lot of what we have been experienced with you as our clients over the last couple of months as we've really tried to figure out how do we use technology and process to help speed up the ability to take advantage of insights and turn those into profits while that campaign's still running. And Tim has just been an amazing person on our team to really help drive this forward. Before he came to Marketing Evolution, Alicia mentioned that he was in the Boston Consulting Group, and he worked in the change management area. So we've been really tapping Tim to be a leader and saying, hey, we've got this great insight, this great knowledge, this great research coming out that tells us, as the campaign's still running, what adjustments can be made. What do we need to do to change in the organization to help make that happen much faster? And so he really has focused on this idea of agile marketing and what that marketing department looks like. And as Tim's pursuing his MBA at Columbia, he's trying to pull together lots of different threads and insights from his past in change management, from what he's learning in best practices through the MBA program, and through direct experience working with you, our clients. So it's going to be a treat to hear Tim present, and with no further ado, I will hand it over to Tim.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Rex and Alicia, and thank you, everyone, for taking the time to attend today's webinar. For those of you who are in the Northeast, I imagine you listening to this in front of a fireplace with a nice hot cup of coffee, or at least, I hope that's what you might be doing. So as Rex mentioned, today's topic is agile marketing. Agile and real time are buzzwords that have been thrown around quite a bit in today's marketing landscape. And we at Marketing Evolution actually feel that more often than not, the current conversations are missing the point. We don't think agile marketing is getting the right tweet out at the right time. We think it's the ability to be flexible across your whole marketing plan based on what's actually happening in the marketplace to make the adjustments to have a better campaign. So over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, we are going to cover 4 topics. The first is I want to draw a little bit of an unusual comparison to an industry that we actually think is a pretty good industry that marketers can learn from, and that is the professional chef. So the first thing we want to talk about is what can marketers actually learn from chefs? Then we're going to switch gears and talk about some steps that every marketing department can take to become a stronger agile marketer. So what are some of the best practices that we've picked up based on working with all of our clients? And then finally, we want to offer a couple of concrete tactics. So first is, how can you actually use creative rotation to boost campaign performance? What have we found is really the best-in-class way for using real-time marketing with creative rotation? And then finally, the last thing we want to take a look at is what are the criteria that you should be using to make corrections during your campaign, media corrections during your campaign. Terrific. So first, starting with a comparison. So, bear with me for a few minutes here as I draw this comparison. I promise we will make it very concrete to marketing over the next couple of minutes here. So the two gentlemen on the screen are both really leaders in their respective industry. On the left side, we have Mark Greatrex, who is the Chief Marketing Officer of Cox Communication, and someone who we really believe is a leader and pioneer in this idea of agile and real-time marketing. On the right, we have Eric Repair, who maybe isn't quite as well known, but is really believed to be the best seafood chef in the world. And what we would argue is that both of these leaders in their respective fields actually have more in common than you might initially think. So let me draw that comparison. So how does a chef actually go about creating a successful dish? So the first thing, of course, is to start with the best ingredients. Those are going to be fresh ingredients, and it's also sometimes going to be a premium ingredient. And the chef will always know when is it the right time to spend a little bit more money to have the best ingredients. The next thing that chef will do is actually bring those ingredients together in a recipe. So they're going to do that really on two factors. One is, what do they know about those ingredients to be true? But also, based on their past experience, what have they learned about how these things go together as well as possible? And really, very critically, if you ever watch a professional chef cook, you'll notice that they are always tasting the results as they come together. And as they're doing that, they're making those adjustments to their recipe. And so, of course, at the end of the process, you're able to enjoy a delicious dish. And I hope for the folks who are on the East Coast and who are having lunch now, I hope this is not making you too hungry and you've got your food in front of you. So let me draw that comparison to the marketer. So of course you can substitute this idea of starting with the best ingredients to starting with the right marketing tactics. How that's coming together is really your marketing plan. But what we really want to focus on today, and a point that we think is really important for all of our clients and other marketers, this idea of steps number 3 and 4, which is you should constantly be measuring, and based on what you're learning, you should be making mid-course corrections. And what that ultimately will yield, instead of just a delicious dish, is will really be enhanced business results. And so as we talk about today this idea of tasting and making adjustments, the first point that we want to make, and the biggest misconception about real-time marketing, is how hard it is. So it really isn't that hard, and one of the things that we'll show you today is you actually don't need to make big changes to have a big difference on the final product. Really, some of the tactics we'll show you today are tactics that are totally costless to your team, but could have a pretty significant impact on your final campaign results. What we're going to focus on is this idea is that you need a process for getting the information, and just as importantly, you need a set of responses based on everything that you're finding. So just as a chef, if they tasted their food and it was found it was a little bland, they might add some salt or some spice. What we want to have is the same idea for marketers. So based on what they're finding in the marketplace, they will have really these second nature reactions to be able to overcome and correct those things. And we want that process to be just as intuitive for a marketer as it is for a chef. So unfortunately for me, the image on the left is one that I'm all too familiar with from my cooking days. But what I really want to focus on today is how to make sure that that same burnt turkey isn't something that our clients and marketers are experiencing in their own marketing campaign. And the key point, of course, is it's too late to check your food after it's cooked. By the time that you actually pull it out of the oven to taste it, this is what you might have. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today are, one, set it and forget it marketing should be a thing of the past. We believe that every marketer should now have or has available the resources to be able to understand what's happening and why it's happening during the campaign. Some of the clients who are on the phone will know that we're actually providing results really as soon as 2 weeks after the campaign starts. And so the opportunity at this point is not just to get the information, it's to have the systems and processes in place to know how to respond based on the different cues that you're getting. So I actually want to take the time to actually start with a poll question. So the question is, how easy is it for you to adjust your campaign, and I mean things like creative rotation, media mix, media targeting, while it's happening. So we talked about this idea of tasting, but how easy is it for you actually to taste, to go to the point of mid-course correcting? So is it a touch of a button, make a few calls, call in some favors? Is it begging, or is it like stopping the Titanic? And so let me actually pull up the poll here. And you should now be able to vote. And I'll share with you the results in just a moment here. All right, about 20% of you have voted, so let's give you one more minute here. And I will close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right. So I'm actually going to share with you what I see here. And it's actually, for the most part, pretty, some encouraging news. So what you'll see is that, for no one quite yet is it a touch of a button. And that is something that you'll see over the course of this webinar is what we as Marketing Evolution are really working towards. It is great to see with so many clients on the phone that a lot of you are really already kind of have that predisposition towards setting it up so that you can make those mid-course corrections. So just over half of you are able to do it with some calls and some favors. For about the other half, it's a little bit harder. Lots of begging, some buyouts and penalties, and for about 10% of you, it's like stopping the Titanic. So part of what we want to share today is, I think you've already illustrated that it is possible. It is possible to make those adjustments. So now we want to talk through how, why, and when you should be making those adjustments. So the first step that we really think is critical is building flexibility into the marketing process. So we started with this idea of what marketers can learn from chefs, but of course there are lots of industries who are trying to make these same types of decisions in terms of real-time corrections and really getting the most out of every dollar invested. The two books that are, I think, pretty well worn on the desk of every Marketing Evolution employee are the Lean Startup and the 4 Disciplines of Execution. And both of these books are really focused on the same idea, which is how can you make progress as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible. And what we've done is we've pulled a couple of key principles that we really think that all marketers should be adopting in terms of building flexibility into the process. And as we walk through these principles, we'll talk through what are some of the real kind of tactics that our clients are employing and what we're encouraging other folks to employ. So the first and really the most important thing that marketers can do right now is creating a cadence of accountability. And we all talk about, and I think everyone on this phone believes that accountability is a key focus of every marketing department right now. What we would distinguish as being a little bit different is this idea of a cadence, that it's something that's happening on a regular basis with clear goals and regular meetings. Oftentimes what we find is that there are kind of ebbs and flows of marketing accountability, which makes it a little bit harder to build process around. So really for us, the most important thing is this idea of a regular cadence. The second piece is the idea of keeping a scorecard. So in order to make decisions, you need to know what's working and what's not. So some Marketing Evolution clients will be familiar with the Marketing Evolution dashboards, and we'll share some of those examples as we go. But unless you're able to monitor the actionable metrics, you won't be able to drive action. And the last piece, and we think this is really kind of underpinning all the things that we're trying to do together as a firm, is working smarter and not harder. So one of the common misconceptions, as I said at the very beginning of this call, was that being a real-time marketer is more work. In a lot of ways, it actually can be less work. It's just different type of work. And so we'll talk about how you can use technology to get information faster and make those smarter decisions. So then translating those basic ideals into a pre-campaign checklist. So I can't imagine that you'll probably be using the same scroll for your pre-campaign checklist, but we'd be happy to provide these following the call as well in terms of an actual PowerPoint presentation. So a couple of things that really before your campaign starts, you want to make sure you have the following elements in place. The single most important thing that we tell our clients is to have a clear definition of marketing success. One of the biggest disruptors of change is the idea that you're able to find success almost anywhere if you look hard enough. And I think this is particularly true in marketing, where marketers have access to a variety of different metrics, everything from funnel metrics to intermediate metrics like click-through, jumping to your different landing pages to sales itself. And what we would really argue is if you don't have a clear definition, precise definition of success, as you get into the campaign, you'll find success elsewhere, and that'll be enough to slow down the decision to change. So using a concrete example, if you're launching a new product and your goal is trial, you might find that your new product campaign is doing a great job at driving awareness, but isn't doing a great job at driving trial. It would be very easy to say, well, this is a great first step. We're driving awareness. But if your campaign was specifically designed to drive trial, and it wasn't a two-phase campaign to drive awareness and then trial, then we would argue is you really need to actually make a change. If your goal is to drive trial and it's not doing it, you need to do it. And the only way to be able to have that resolve is by deciding ahead of time of what is that definition of success. The second piece is to have a really strong idea of where your media flexibility lies. So know what can be changed and when. Part of being a real-time marketer, an agile marketer, is being able to make those changes on the fly. And we know that today it is probably impossible to change all of your campaign, but depending on the horizon of your campaign, if you're planning over a couple of quarters or even a full quarter, you will be able to have the opportunity at different points throughout the campaign to make those changes. And so what we really recommend is for every media type, really down to the publisher, is to have a very clear accounting is when is the final go, no go, when is the last time they can make an adjustment to this media throughout the quarter and even potentially throughout the year, so that as you're actually making those mid-course corrections, you know what's flexible and what's fixed. When you have this clear definition of success, you have an idea of what can be changed, then it's really natural to start to create scenario plans for those likely outcomes. So if something isn't working as well as you'd expect, who is going to do what to fix this? And this is where we really focus on actual individuals and their roles within the team and what would each individual do given those different scenarios. So it allows, while you're in campaign, less of a debate about what to do or how to do it, and more just the ability to actually get it done. As I mentioned earlier with this idea of a cadence of accountability, once you have all these pieces together, we really recommend just building this process into your marketing campaign and your marketing calendar. So set those decision points throughout the campaign based on where you know you have flexibility to be able to get the most positive outcomes from any changes. So again, this is something that well before your campaign starts, you should put a couple of dates on the calendar where you're going to make key decisions in terms of whether to pursue additional media, to make mid-course corrections, or make any adjustments. And I think the important kind of change in attitude is that we want our clients to be surprised actually when nothing changes. So I think most marketers are kind of operating under the hope that things will stay the same. We actually operate under the hope that things will change because it means we'll have an opportunity to do a little bit better. And the last piece, and I think this ties all of these different recommendations together, is to leave something in the bank. And what I mean by that is to actually set aside, we recommend between 10 and 20% of your additional campaign spend to allow for in-market spending on the big opportunities. Once you know what's working and what's not, we find that really more often than not, really I could even say 4 to 5 times, the incremental gain you can get from investing in the most effective media outweighs the kind of incremental cost of investing a little bit later in the campaign. And certainly this is something that should be a discussion across all of the teams with your media agency partners as well to really understand what those trade-offs are. But really we recommend that 10 to 20% of the money be left for those mid-course corrections. All right. So transitioning a little bit, we've talked about this idea of Agile as a process, but really it's also a philosophy. And so we want to share with you is what is our definition of Agile marketing. So when we talk about Agile marketing, what does that really mean? And for Marketing Evolution, at its core, Agile is real-time marketing that is focused on one-to-one interactions. So unpacking that a little bit, the first idea is that it is customer-focused. So one thing that we always remind our team, and we try to remind our clients, is that media does not generate sales, individuals do. And as information, as the ability to get information about individuals expands, this ability to really market, even with mass media at a one-to-one level, has really expanded. So much of our focus is understanding at that individual level what is motivating a customer, and then how can we influence them to help achieve our campaign goals. The second piece is that really marketing campaigns should be connected really across every touch point and every outcome. So we really advocate beginning to pull down the walls that might exist in some marketing departments. So the idea that traditional and digital should sit separately is something that, of course, we think they should be pulled together. Direct versus traditional should be pulled together. And we'd even go a step further to say that really anything that's touching the consumer should be pulled together with marketing. So that would be your CRM databases, your analytics, because really what we're creating is an ecosystem where we understand for every touch point what is the eventual outcome. And then finally the pieces that we'll talk a little bit more today, which is in market. So we want to give marketers a better chance to get the right answer and predictive. It's not just what's happening today. It's based on what's happening today, what can we expect will happen in the future. And as we talk about the kind of next two marketing tactics that we'll dive a little bit deeper on, these are the 2 points you really want to focus in on. Great. So thinking about a typical campaign, there's obviously a lot of adjustments that a marketer can make. We've talked about the process by which we recommend giving yourself the opportunity to make those adjustments. Now we actually want to get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts and talk about some of the adjustments that we really believe that a marketer should make. So the first we want to talk about is creative rotation, and we'll use a kind of a topical campaign for a lot of our clients, which is the upcoming Olympics campaign, to talk about how you should really be conducting one-to-one marketing with mass media. But we'll also talk about this idea of in-market optimization and what are the criteria that marketers should use in order to determine if they should make an adjustment to their campaign or not. Great, so first starting with the Olympics. So the Olympics, of course, I think for those who are following and reading Ad Age, it's been about the front page news almost every day, and I imagine it will be for the next couple of weeks as we move forward, because it really is both an enormous investment as well as an enormous opportunity. So when we think about the Olympics, I think there are certain characteristics of the Olympics that are true of other similar types of high-profile campaigns. So one is that the creative will typically be very strong. So we work with a lot of marketers across a wide range of industries, many of which are sponsoring these games as well as previous games, and what we find is that for the most part it is very excellent creative. It's great subject content. It's able to capture both emotional and functional appeal. And so typically when we're looking at Olympics creative, it is testing kind of at the higher end of what you'd expect to see. Another key factor of the Olympics is it has a very diverse audience, wide range of demos, wide range of behavioral groups. So really, a pretty broad group of people that you'll be touching. Those people are typically very highly engaged, and because of that, this campaign will have a lot of frequency. So you have, as a marketer, an opportunity to put some really great creative in front of people a whole lot of times where they're really paying pretty close attention. So the question then becomes, if you've got all that great creative, how do you decide what to run, how much, and when? So we want to go back to that Agile tenet, which is that marketing should be moving more on a one-to-one basis with a focus on the individual. And so what we want to do with creative rotation is move from an aggregate view of the world to really an individual view of the world. So the traditional ad test, and we say these tests have a lot of merit, particularly before your campaign launches, will give you some aggregate metrics. So they'll say something like 74% of people say they like your ad, or during the campaign, 42% of people say they remember your ad. And we've worked with a lot of different marketers to really hone these into effective tools to determine what creative should run or if it should run during a campaign. And so that's really the decision that most marketers are making, which is either we run it or not, or during the campaign, let's keep it in the rotation or let's not. What we would advocate is we actually kind of disaggregate that. So instead of saying that 74% of people say they like a specific ad, let's take all of those individual people and understand what's motivating them individually. So here we have, as you can see, everyone from it looks like a cowboy to a professional baseball player and everyone in between. And what we want to do is we actually want to find the people who are actually impacted by each of your ads. And then what that allows us to say is, let's not to say should we run it or not, but let's say let's put it in front of the right people in order to have the most impact. And so I know that might be a little bit kind of confusing at the top line, so let's dive a little bit deeper into that idea. So let's take P&G an example with it's been really a highly lauded campaign of their Thank You Mom campaign. So the first thing we want to do is find out is who is impacted by which specific ads. The way that Marketing Evolution does that is by using an individual level attribution model. So for every consumer in our data set, we will be able to say this person saw this ad across these different media. And once we do that, we're able to do some pretty interesting analytics. So the first thing that we'll be able to say, as you can see on the left side, is what type of people like that specific ad. So in the case of the creative targeting box here, you can imagine each of those columns relate to one of those ads on top. And you'll see that the red groups are the groups that respond a little bit worse to the ad, and the green groups are the groups that respond a little bit better to the ad. And what we've found is based on different creative, based on different functional cues, is that different people, as you'd expect, would like different ads. On the right side, what you'll see is a slightly different view. And this is when we, again, pull everyone together and we say, by different creative exposures, how much is this changing someone's opinion of the brand, or how much is this driving incremental sales? So you can imagine those three different lines on the right side are three different ads. And as you move left to right, essentially that's what's happening when someone gets incremental exposure. And so as they move from 5 exposures to 10 exposures, the lift we're seeing on that key metric might move from 16 to 22 or 10 to 14. And what that tells us is, are some ads just performing better overall? But also it's telling us how many times does someone need to see an ad before it really has a pretty significant impact. So what is that minimum and maximum frequency level that we need people to have in order to be impacted by the creative? And then what becomes really powerful is when we're able to bring those two things together to set a creative rotation. And the way that Marketing Evolution recommends setting your creative rotation is actually through audience composition. So what we have done is we will take all of the different media levers, using television as an example, and we will identify what is the audience composition of that. And that's data that's available to Marketing Evolution. It's available to your agency. And then what we do is we align that to those different creative targeting. So once we know, for example, that the ad on the right side doesn't do as well against ages 55 to 64, but is much better against a married or Asian demographic, we can actually find those audiences, those networks, that overrepresent in those different categories. And what you'll see on the bottom is the automated process by which we take a current rotation across those different levers. And you can see here, just as an example, Network Prime, Network Weekend Sports, A&E, Adult Swim. We can take a current rotation and move it to an optimal rotation by putting the ads in front of the people who will be most impacted by them. So in the case of Adult Swim, you might see that in the current rotation, 71% of the impressions or the creative on Adult Swim was towards ads too, when really based on that audience composition, really that ad shouldn't be running on the network at all. And so we talked about this idea of how technology can help marketers work faster and smarter, not necessarily harder. And so in this case, technology can really be an enabler. So what we're providing for Marketing Evolution clients is the ability in the middle of the campaign at kind of predetermined dates, the ability to say for all of your different creative across all of your different placements, what is that right creative allocation rotation for every lever that you're investing in. So in preparation for this webinar, I actually spent a couple minutes going back and looking at some of our Q4 campaign results. And what we found is that the minimum improvement that we saw from a kind of switch in creative rotation was 1.5%. So that is to say that you impacted 1.5% more people than you would have if you had kept the rotation the same. And that was in the case of a client that really had the rotation pretty dead on. But there's also a wide range of variety of rotations where we found that it wasn't quite right. Maybe there was a couple of more pieces of creative and it was a little bit harder to get it right. In those cases, we actually saw that there was an opportunity for 14% campaign improvement. So in that case, if your ROI had previously been something like $1.20, just by changing the creative rotation, you can move it up closer to $1.40. And for us, this is a pretty big wow moment because this is really nearly costless improvement. It's as close as we are able to find as, quote, found money. It doesn't cost anything to change your creative rotation. Really all it is taking all of that wonderful information you're able to attain about that individual level data and then apply it on a broader mass media level. And this is something that, as we talked about, can be automated, but this is something that any marketer can do as well based on maybe doing a deeper dive on those creative diagnostics, figuring out where is it working best, where is it working worse. But this is something that we really think is kind of a game changer and something that any marketer can kind of, quote, do real-time marketing just today. Terrific. So changing gears a little bit, I want to ask a separate question. So this question is, if your CEO told you today that you had to cut 20% of your next 6-month campaign budget, what would you do? And again, of course, there's not really necessarily a right answer to this, and we've seen all sorts of different answers, but I'll share with you kind of what your peers have said. So you should be able to vote now. Okay, great. The votes are coming in. So just about half of you have voted, so I'll just give you another couple of seconds here. All right, terrific. So I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. Terrific. So let me share with you what we've shown. So what you're seeing is we've got a kind of a pretty good mix, and there's some folks who are just going to cut a little bit of all media. The 10% group is going to be cutting some media entirely to leave others whole. About half of you said that you removed the media that worked least well the previous campaign. Another 40%, and I'm seeing that some people clicked on a couple of things, we're cutting the experimental media first, and then about 50% were saying to cut the lowest performers in the current campaign. So of course, what we're advocating is for the last piece, and it's terrific to see so many of you really kind of sharing that opinion. But we also want to share with you what we think the criteria and process should be for how do you determine what is the lowest performer in the current campaign. And based on previous ways of looking at marketing analytics, we actually think that for a lot of marketers that might be a little bit skewed. So for the next portion of the presentation, we want to share a couple of criteria that we encourage marketers to use when thinking about really what is the lowest performer and how should you think about in-campaign performance. So this chart, I think, will look familiar to a lot of people, which is that for the most part, budget planning happens on an annual basis. Campaigns are set ahead of time, and there's probably going to be a good amount of changing of the campaigns up until the campaign start. But once the campaign goes, it's more or less set. And of course, what we would argue is that using campaign 1 as an example, even though it's only been running for 2 to 4 weeks, we would say you would know so much more in week 4 than you did in week 0 or 4 weeks or 8 weeks ahead of the campaign. You should absolutely be able to take the information you've learned to influence the remaining 8 to 10 weeks of the campaign. So what we really advocate and argue with our clients is that the focus shouldn't be on what's actually working today. It should focus on what we think is going to be working in the future. And that's really, I think, a key distinction, that the value of in-campaign learnings isn't a scorecard. It's not to say, all right, this is working well, this is working a little bit worse than we thought, this is great, good for us, or, we can do better next time. That is maybe a byproduct of the value of an in-campaign learning, but the real core of the in-campaign learning is to have a set of analytics that allow you to predict forward for the second half or the remaining 3 quarters of the campaign. So a lot of you, I think, on the phone will be familiar with this idea of a spend to impact response function. But for those of you who are not familiar, I'll just give you a quick refresher or a quick introduction. And this is the way that Marketing Evolution looks at marketing effectiveness, which is for all of your key campaign levers, your key marketing tactics, there is going to be a relationship between spend and the number of people you impact. What these curves look like will really differ based on the target. They'll differ based on what you're actually trying to accomplish. So if your goal is to drive awareness versus your goal is to drive trial. But this gives us one consistent way of looking at if you had $1 to spend, where should you spend it? And so when we're looking at current campaign impacts, so let's say it's 2 or 3 weeks into the campaign and we have some initial results, and this is going to be a 10-week campaign. What we'll see is where you are against, really first we'll build these curves, and the reason we'll be able to build these curves is because we'll have the ability at the individual level to see people with a wide variety of exposure levels, so some people who saw just 1 or 2 elements of your campaign versus some people who saw many, which allows us to create these curves across different spend levels and really different underlying reach frequency characteristics. And then we'll plot where you are in the curve at that point in the campaign. And in this case, I'm not sharing with you benchmarks, so I'm not saying this is how you compare to benchmarks, and that's certainly something we do. This is purely, here's where you are based on what you've done to date. And this is essentially, in itself, we would argue not that helpful. What really is helpful and what we encourage everyone to look at is to actually extrapolate forward. So based on where we are today, where do we think we're going to be 10 weeks from now or 3 months from now? And in this case, what we'll find is that in some of those places where originally you were really kind of just on the point of, maybe 2/3 up the point of diminishing returns, when we project forward to where we expect you'll be at the end of the campaign based on the reach frequency characteristics of the campaign, in many of these marketing vehicles, you will be beyond that point of saturation. And so when we talk about opportunities for improvement, it isn't necessarily what's going right or wrong now, although that's certainly a part of it. Just as much of it is taking what you know now and extrapolating forward so you can avoid problems in the future. And in this case, something like, let's say, radio, or I believe this is digital, network television, or there are going to be different points where if this is a longer campaign, you actually will have the opportunity to move some of the media out of that campaign. And so when Marketing Evolution is working towards an optimization, it's really with this idea in mind, which is where are you going to be by the time the campaign wraps up. And these, of course, will be the media that really, for us, are the red flags, which is to say, if we look at them now, they're great, but 10 weeks from now, these are actually really going to be wasted money. Kind of the other side of that same coin is in order to be able to act on what you're learning in the marketplace, Marketing Evolution would recommend you actually have 2 different sets of metrics. First, what we'd call is a set of leading indicators. And these are going to be things that will actually happen before the sale takes place. So these could be things like purchase intent. It could be things like intermediate metrics like visits to a website. And we'll go through on the next slide what some of those things look like. But the key point being is that by the time you're actually able to check to see if your campaign is having an influence on that lagging indicator, let's say sales, it could be too late to actually change the campaign. And so one of the common traps that we find marketers looking at is looking in the rear view mirror to see what actually happened in terms of their end result. But in doing that, they've missed the opportunity to make a change. So diving a little bit deeper on that idea. So leading indicators are the things that are going to be out in front of you. So some of the things that we commonly see as good leading indicators are certain brand metrics, things like consideration, interest, or intent. Some type of intermediate action. Are they visiting a page on your website? Are they calling through? One thing you'll see that we call out as a kind of watch out or a gotcha is this idea of specific digital metrics being a good indicator. Marketing Evolution and many other companies have done lots of studies to say that those are a good indicator for the maybe 1 to 2% of people who are doing that. But in the context of a broader campaign, those don't necessarily predict overall results. So the key then is to find the leading indicators that are really well linked to your lagging indicators. And those are really the successful business metrics that you're looking at. Things like sales, things like program tune-in, things like enrollment. And so one of the things that we spend a lot of time on with those individual level data sets is linking these two things together so we can find the leading indicators that will allow us to make decisions before the actual lagging indicator happens. And what we won't talk too much about today, but I think it's certainly an important thing to consider as well when you're looking at your campaigns, are external factors. So what happens when your main competitor starts a campaign with $40 million in spend over 10 weeks? What happens when there's an economic shock that you weren't expecting? What happens when there's a change in competitive pricing? In order to be a really successful real-time agile marketer, you need to be able to link together these three factors into one cohesive view. How do leading indicators lead to lagging indicators, and how are both of those influenced by external factors? Again, when we're bringing it all together, and we talk about this idea of technology as an enabler, this is what we're using a dashboard for. So on the right side here, you can see some of those external factors, things like share of employees, employment, competitor pricing. You can see performance against the frontier curve. So here's how we think you're going to do. Here's where, if we make changes, what you can do, the difference between optimized versus expected, as well as the differences in between creative mix, impact versus benchmark. So putting all of those factors in one place in order to make decisions. And so the last point I want to make is the idea of what is the role of the dashboard. So one of the common things that we see in marketing organizations are dashboards that have dozens, if not hundreds, of metrics. And what we would really recommend is paring that down to the 5, 10, maybe 15 metrics that you can actually make decisions based on. So what are those leading indicators that are going to be most important to you? And what are the things that if you saw, you'll actually make a change and leave all those other metrics for deeper down in the dashboard for maybe a post-campaign analysis. So to wrap up, today we really talked about this idea of real-time marketing. One of the things that, of course, is really important is how you're bringing together different people in your organization, different people across your different agencies to have one cohesive view of what is success, kind of what is the truth, and then what can we do to make changes based on what we learn. So Marketing Evolution's ROI Brain is our tool set for bringing those things together. So we talked briefly about the mission control dashboard, but really there's dozens of things that you can do to be a more agile marketer. Simple things like using an online marketing calendar. It is amazing how much time can be spent making adjustments to Excel flowcharts, or the confusion that can be caused by different people using different versions of the different flowcharts. Bringing all of this information together into one cohesive set of tools allows marketers to think less about what is the information that they're getting and more about what can they do based on that information. So just to do a quick recap, what can marketers learn from chefs? So the thing that we would recommend is taste and season. So just like a great chef isn't going to serve something that they haven't tasted along the way, we think a great marketer is going to be really kind of constantly tasting, checking in, measuring, and so they have the opportunity to make that mid-course corrections. A couple of easy guidelines for being an agile marketer: set clear definitions of marketing success, understand where your media flexibility is, scenario plan for the different outcomes based on your media flexibility. If possible, leave something in the bake. As I said, we are recommending 10 to 20%. And of course, set campaign decision points so that there are certain, a cadence of accountability. So it's not, are we going to make changes? It's when are we going to make changes? And then finally, the two tactics we reviewed. So how can creative rotation boost campaign performance? So we'd encourage all of you to think about mass media not as an aggregate media, but as an individual media. So how can you take your mass campaign and really tailor it to have individual impact? And then, of course, the last piece is how can you make media corrections before the end of the campaign? The two things that we'd say, the most important thing is to predict forward. It's not enough to take a look based on what worked in the past or even what's working now. It's what do you expect will work in the future. And the final piece is use leading indicators, because lagging indicators, again, leave you kind of looking in the rear view mirror. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. I do want to actually open the board to questions. So there is on the right side of the webinar a place where you can ask any questions, which Rex and I will be happy to answer. So I'll give you just a few moments to ask any questions you might have. So the first question we got is, how do you know what are the right leading indicators? Which is a terrific question. And that is something that Marketing Evolution would argue has really changed in the last 2 years. It used to be a question that was a pretty hard one to answer, but today it actually is a pretty straightforward question, and it really is a matter of really using a strong individual level data set. So most of the people who are on the phone are actually marketers who have access to strong CRM databases. And so what it enables you or Marketing Evolution to do is to link together outcomes with attitudes. And so when Marketing Evolution builds an attribution data set, we're really bringing together things like brand metrics, demographics, different types of media exposures, online versus offline, and linking that all together to sales. And so what we're able to say is very specifically, here are the, just pure media exposure, just based on the fact that someone saw this ad, they bought. But here are also the branding and demographic indicators that also predicted that that person would buy. And by finding those strongest predictive indicators of what will ultimately lead to a transaction, we can pull out the ones that are actually a leading indicator. Great, so that's the only question we got. Rex, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think that I really enjoyed the presentation. I was going to ask you to elaborate a bit on the average improvement that you saw. You said that one of the cost-free parts is creative rotation, and you used the TV example. And of course, we're also doing that in digital as well, with the direct connection into DMPs and the ability to see all that type of targeting information. Speak a little bit. You showed a range of 1.4 to 14%. Translate that into the kind of dollar impact that can have, and what you're seeing is the average range that a marketer should expect.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we're looking at campaign optimization, really we're looking at pulling together a couple of different pieces. So creative rotation will certainly be an important part of that. And as I described, that can see an impact of up to 14%. Where a lot of the impact will also change is when you're able to either invest incremental money into your top performing media or pull away money from media that are either underperforming or have the opportunity to potentially saturate. And so that is where that idea of media flexibility and flexibility accounting are so important. And those kind of the impact on those different metrics actually are probably, if done well, 2 or even 3 times higher than what we see on the creative. And so what we're seeing is over the course of a campaign, let's say it's a 9-month campaign, and we're able to forecast from the first couple of weeks, where do we see this campaign heading? By the end of the campaign, we oftentimes see an opportunity for improvement of 40 to up to 65%, actually during the campaign. So that's the ability, for example, if you had a $1.20 typical ROI, just by making those mid-course corrections, understanding what's working well and what's working not, is over the course of the campaign, you can improve that up to $1.60.
Great, thanks, Tim. The other question I wanted to just do a little bit of impromptu interviewing of you on this to talk about is, as you're working with the teams that are trying to make that jump to mid-course correction, what are the first kind of things that you do with your change management background help them internally get organized and to take their first couple steps forward to making a process that makes moving in a more agile way possible?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. So I think the very most important thing can be, I think, the scenario planning. And the reason I say that is because it allows you to put yourself in those shoes before the campaign even starts. So before you know what's working or not, we recommend providing a couple of different scenarios based on either benchmarks or what we've seen in the past, and having marketers kind of make those decisions ahead of time, which is, if we saw this information in the campaign, we would do these things. And it's a great opportunity to really have those types of debates and conversations and test it with the media agency and test it with the internal partners before you're in field, so that by the time you're actually in the campaign, it's already been planned. It's already happened. You've already made those decisions ahead of time. So I certainly think that that is probably the most powerful thing that a marketer can do. And I would say the second piece is also, I think, all having access to the same information, which is oftentimes we see that there are silos of analytics or silos of insights, and people are seeing maybe, quote, different versions of the truth. And one of the things we really recommend, whether it's with your agency partners, whether it's the insights team, the analytics team, the media team, the brand team, the CMO, even the CEO, you're all seeing the same version of the truth to build alignment. So it's not a question of, are we seeing this the same way? It's a question of, all right, we're all seeing the same thing, now what should we do about it?
Yeah, so what I've heard you say is that the definition of success in that strategy session we do around scenario planning, important human process, then that feeds into the mission control dashboards that the clients are using, so they're all seeing the same vision of success, and they get those red light alerts that automatically send them when they need to make some changes. And then you've got the MRM piece where we're looking at the marketing calendar. We all know what flexibility in the spend is. And you've got the system directly connected into the TV Nielsen data feed on composition. You've got directly connected into DMPs with digital targeting and so forth. So you can get to the point where when you decide to move, you can press a button and make that happen. Tell me a little bit more about the piece with approvals, because I know that one story I heard from a client team of ours was that when they went to go make the changes, they didn't actually have a map in their organization of who was responsible for approving the changes for, say, radio, for example. Tell me a little about the workflow and how you're streamlining, making that approval process faster and easier.
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of initial reactions to that. So that is something that I've certainly seen and experienced as well, which is the idea that when you're moving in this way for the first time, that you are going to run into some challenges that maybe you hadn't seen ahead of time. So I think the very first piece, and I'll go back to that idea that these decisions should be happening ahead of time. So when you're running through that scenario plan, and I talked about the idea of the scenario plans being more about execution and who does what than necessarily kind of why they're doing it. And so when you have that decision that, for example, that radio isn't quite working and we want to move some of those dollars elsewhere in the campaign, when that kind of button is pressed, you have the system mapped to the right people. So these are the people who are going to make those decisions, and the information is disseminated to them. So it really, I think, is a matter of, one, doing ahead of time, but two, also really mapping, again, kind of that idea of one version of the truth, mapping everybody onto that same process. And so, Rex, certainly you'll know that Marketing Evolution has a system of different workflow tools, whether it's via our best practices engine or our MRM calendar, to really help automate that process and make it easy. So once a client says, this is the right person for this job, we'll map that person into the system so that when that decision is made, they'll be notified.
So last question here, and I know we're wrapping up, and I think there may be another question on the board that I'm seeing. I'll read it to you, and then just we can see if we get one more time for any other question. A question came in that says, I understand that focusing on about future campaign impact, it's predictive. Does your process also include a step where you reconcile sales data with your predictive model? I would assume so, but I want to ask.
That's a really great question. So the answer is yes. And the way that Marketing Evolution does it, and the way kind of we recommend our clients move forward, is that those models should be really updated twice a year. So we're going to be making decisions based on what we're learning in field. So we're seeing this is working or not. These are our strong leading indicators. In the past, we know that those have been correlated to those lagging indicators, but we're updating those models twice a year. And that model refresh process, the way it happens is that our data scientist team leads that. Of course, we share the results with our clients, but I think the really important piece is that it's automatically updated in all of the software. So when we do that model refresh, all of those findings are kind of pulled through the whole software in terms of the planning, the scenario planning, the forecasting, so that, again, now everyone is kind of working off that same updated version of the truth.
Well, and that's a really interesting point, because as you were showing that image where you had the link between, I think you had a picture of bad weather, and you had the lagging indicators of sales with the rearview mirror, and the leading indicators looking down the road, like purchase consideration and so forth. When you see, with the changing economy right now, I imagine that the responsiveness to advertising and people's willingness to spend, that's an important thing to be updating, those external factors. Can you share a quick anecdote as we wrap up of a situation where you've seen an external factor change the effectiveness of marketing and require a shift in budget that would help marketers make more sales and profits?
Yeah, absolutely. So one that immediately comes to mind, and as I take a look through our list here, I don't see any automotive marketers, but that is one where I can think of an immediate example of gas prices. That is, gas prices shift, and maybe they are a little bit different than what you'd expected at the start of your campaign. Suddenly, as gas prices rise, some of your larger vehicles look a lot less appealing to consumers. And so what you might be seeing in the marketplace is your media is not as effective, but if you're just looking at just the leading or lagging indicators, it isn't necessarily telling you why. And so that would be an example of where we're pulling in an external factor, measuring it in our models to say, all right, this is the reason why our media is not as effective. No matter what we do, our media isn't going to be so effective, so maybe now it's time to change our creative focus to, for example, a vehicle that works a little bit better with higher gas prices.
And what's really exciting about what you described is that is tapping into the insight about how to change your spending across a portfolio, so you can shift from one product to another, or even within that product from one creative message that might be more sales promotion oriented, like price off the vehicle, versus one that's maybe more benefit driven that works really well when the gas prices were lower, and even by which target audience of who would respond to what messages. So yeah, that's a great example. Well, we're at the top of the hour. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And Tim, thank you for taking us through Agile marketing. If you guys have more questions about Agile marketing or other thoughts, you can see Tim's email up there. Please feel free to email him, or you can email me directly. And I hope that you will join us for our next webinar. These, of course, are primarily for our marketers that we get to work with day in, day out. We appreciate you and hope this adds value. And anyone else who has joined us today, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thanks, Rex. Thanks, everyone.